Rancher pretends to sleep to test the widow, but what she does shocks him. The wind carried dust across the open prairie as twilight bled into night, turning the horizon a deep, bruised purple. Out on the black mesa spread, cattle lowed in the distance, and the ranch hands shuffled toward the bunkhouse after a long day's ride. The smell of supper still lingered in the main house, drifting from the kitchen where the widow, Clara Hayes, worked quietly with sleeves rolled up and her hair pinned back in the plain, neat way she always wore it. John Cutter, master of the ranch, sat back in his leather chair by the hearth, boots stretched long before him. He was a hard man by reputation, wealthy from cattle and land, carved from stone and stubbornness. Men said he could stare down rustlers without lifting his colt. But tonight, John Cutter felt something he had not known in years, unease. The widow had been in his house only a month. She had come broken and hollow, her husband dead of fever, leaving her and her boy with nothing. She worked for her keep, washing, cooking, mending. Cutter had taken her in not from sentiment, but practicality, or so he told himself. Yet each evening when she crossed his parlor to bank the fire or lay out his supper, John felt the weight of her presence like sunlight through storm clouds. Still, doubt nagged him. He had been surrounded too long by people who wanted his wealth, his land, his name. Did Clara see only the man who held the purse strings? Or did she see him, the man beneath the dust and scars? So that night, John decided on a test. He stretched out on the couch, one arm draped across his chest, eyes closed though he was wide awake. He slowed his breathing, feigning sleep. If Clara was the kind of woman to take advantage, or to sneer once his eyes were shut, tonight he would know. The house grew still save for the tick of the great clock. Then came the faint sound of skirts brushing the wooden floor. Clara stepped into the parlor, a small basket of mending tucked beneath her arm. She moved soft as a whisper, her bare feet padding near the hearth. John cracked his lashes just enough to watch. She bent to tend the fire, coaxing new life into the embers, her face bathed in flickering light. He thought he saw the faintest weariness etched at the corners of her mouth, but her eyes, hazel flecked with green, were steady as she worked. When the fire crackled brighter, she set aside her basket and turned toward him. For a breath she simply stood, watching him. John's heart hammered, though he didn't move a muscle. Then Clara did something he hadn't expected at all. She reached for the blanket folded over the back of the couch, shook it gently, and draped it across his chest with slow, careful hands. Her fingers lingered a moment longer than needed. She smoothed the blanket as if tucking in a child, her touch light but sure. John felt the warmth of it more than the fire itself. But it was what came next that shook him to the core. Clara knelt by his boots, brushing the trail dust gently away with her handkerchief. She whispered, barely audible, "You work yourself near to breaking, Mr. Cutter. Harder than any man should. The men don't see it, but I do. You've been kinder than I deserve since Jacob passed, and I thank God for it." She paused, bowed her head. "I don't know what tomorrow holds for me and Samuel. But may the Lord bless you, for giving us more than we had any right to ask." And before she rose, she leaned forward and pressed her lips, featherlight, against the back of his calloused hand where it rested on the blanket. John Cutter, who had faced down Comanche raids and cattle stampedes, who had killed men in duels and buried his own kin, nearly flinched at the jolt that went through him. A widow's prayer and a kiss meant more than 100 speeches or deeds. It was not desire alone, it was gratitude, respect, maybe even the seed of something deeper. He kept still until she gathered her mending and moved softly from the room. Only then did he open his eyes, staring into the fire, breath ragged. He had set a trap to catch deceit. Instead, he had uncovered truth, raw and humbling. The following days, John carried her words like a hidden brand against his heart. He rode the fence lines, gave orders to the men, and handled cattle sales in town, but his mind drifted back again and again to that moment in the firelight. He began to see her differently. He noticed the way she guided her boy with patience, even when Samuel tested her with questions and mischief. He saw how she worked until her hands were raw but never once complained. And at night, he no longer looked at her as a burden taken in from pity. He looked at her as the one person in his house who treated him as more than a name or fortune. But a fear gnawed at him too. Should he tell her he had pretended sleep, that he had heard her prayer and felt her kiss? Or would she feel betrayed, thinking he spied on her heart? One evening, as the sun bled gold across the prairie and the hands trailed back to the bunkhouse, John found Clara on the porch. She was darning one of his shirts, her boy chasing fireflies in the yard. "You work too hard," John said, settling onto the rail beside her. Clara looked up, startled. "Work's all I've ever known, Mr. Cutter. It keeps my mind from wandering places it shouldn't." He studied her a long moment. Still, a woman shouldn't carry the world alone. Her lips quirked in a faint smile, but her eyes betrayed the weight she bore. "Sometimes there's no choice." John wanted to say more, but the boy ran up with cupped hands full of fireflies, and Clara's face lit with tender warmth as she knelt to see. John watched her, and something inside him shifted again. She wasn't just surviving, she was giving light, even in her sorrow. That night, John didn't feign sleep. He sat by the fire as Clara read softly from a worn Bible, her voice steady though the words trembled with meaning. Samuel nodded off against her shoulder. John felt the urge to reach across the gulf between them and tell her everything, what he'd seen, what he felt. But pride, old and stubborn, held him back. Days passed, then weeks. The test weighed heavier until finally John could no longer keep silent. It was a Sunday afternoon. The ranch was quiet, the men gone into town. Samuel napped in the side room. Clara sat sewing by the window, light falling across her face. John stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his throat dry as desert dust. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "Yes, Mr. Cutter?" He stepped closer. "There's something you ought to know. Those nights, when you thought me asleep by the fire, I wasn't." Her sewing slipped in her lap. Her eyes widened. You heard me?" He nodded once, steady though his heart thundered. Every word, every prayer, every touch. Color surged into her cheeks. She rose quickly, hands twisting in her apron. I had no right." "Don't." His voice cut sharp, but gentler than he meant. He stepped nearer, close enough to see the sheen of tears in her eyes. "Don't you dare apologize. You showed me more truth in those moments than I've known in years. You didn't do it for show. You did it because it was in your heart." Her lips trembled. "I only wanted to thank you. You've been kind, more than I deserved." John reached, catching her hand in his rough palm. "You deserved it, Clara. And more besides." She stared at him, stunned, caught between fear and hope. "I've lived this life a long time," he went on. "I've got land, cattle, money. But none of it means a damn thing when a man rides home to an empty house. You've changed that. You've put warmth in these walls again. And I'll be damned if I let another night pass pretending to sleep just to hear what's in your heart. I want to hear it awake, beside you. Always." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her gaze never wavered. Slowly, she lifted her free hand and touched his face, as though testing if he was real. "John," she whispered, using his name for the first time. He covered her hand with his own. "Say you'll stay. Not just to work. Not just out of need. Stay because this house ain't a home without you in it." For a long breath, silence hung heavy. Then she nodded, trembling but sure. "I'll stay." John pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in years he felt the weight of loneliness fall away. Outside, the prairie wind stirred the grass, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of new life. The wealthy rancher who had pretended to sleep had set out to test the widow. But it was he who had been tested, and what she had done had shocked him into remembering he was still a man capable of love, and of being loved in return. And from that day forward, no one in the territory spoke of John Cutter as the hard, untouchable cattle baron alone. They spoke of him as the man who found his match in a widow's quiet strength, and who built not just a ranch, but a family.